What if the most dangerous threat to free speech wasn't a dictator's decree, but a series of regulations passed in the name of safety? The UK's new framework introduces sweeping powers over what people can say, see, and share. On the surface, it's about protecting citizens from harm, but underneath, it risks silencing millions of everyday voices. From private message surveillance to stricter hate speech definitions, the rules could make people censor themselves before speaking. In this video, we'll uncover 10 specific rules and why many believe they could reshape democracy itself. Number 1. The Online Safety Act's legal but harmful content rule. This rule is one of the most debated changes in the UK's new framework. At first glance, it appears to protect citizens from harmful online material, but the definition of harmful is vague and highly subjective. Content that is perfectly lawful, such as strong opinions, political criticism, or controversial discussions, can still be flagged and removed if it is judged harmful by regulators or platforms. That means speech does not need to break the law to be restricted. Critics argue this opens the door for overreach, where decisions about what you can say online are made by a handful of tech companies under government pressure. The danger lies in interpretation, as what seems offensive to one group may be an important truth to another. For everyday users, this creates a chilling effect. Imagine writing a post criticizing government policy, questioning a scientific report, or sharing a personal story about sensitive issues. If your words are flagged as potentially harmful, the post may be deleted, or your account could face restrictions. The uncertainty makes people less likely to share their genuine views, not because they are breaking the law, but because they fear crossing an invisible line. Over time, the result is quieter voices, less debate, and fewer perspectives in the digital public square. Supporters of the rule argue that it shields vulnerable groups, particularly children, from harmful narratives. Yet opponents emphasize that safety cannot come at the cost of free expression. The danger is that the rule treats adults like children, deciding on their behalf what is appropriate to read or hear. By labeling lawful speech as harmful, the government reshapes the boundaries of conversation, not by changing the law directly, but by shifting the power of enforcement into private, unaccountable systems. Number 2. Age-gated access to information. One of the lesser-known but deeply impactful changes is the requirement for platforms to impose strict age controls. On the surface, this is meant to shield children from harmful or inappropriate material, but the reach of this rule goes far beyond explicit content. It allows regulators to push sites into blocking or heavily filtering information for anyone under 18. That could include political debates, health advice, or discussions about mental well-being. The irony is clear. Young people, who are the most curious, questioning, and eager to learn, are at risk of being walled off from entire areas of knowledge because the system assumes they cannot handle nuance. For families and educators, the effects may be far-reaching. A teenager searching for resources about voting rights, gender identity, or global conflicts might suddenly find walls where information used to be. The policy does not simply limit access to violent or adult-only materials. It risks classifying controversial or complex issues as unsuitable for youth. That creates a generation of citizens who grow up less informed, less exposed to differing viewpoints, and less able to challenge authority. Critics argue that this is not protection, but control disguised as concern. When knowledge is rationed by age rather than by context, the boundaries of education shrink dramatically. Supporters often highlight safety, saying these safeguards prevent manipulation or harmful exposure. Yet the practical effect is a two-tier internet, one for adults with access to the full spectrum of ideas, and another for younger users, filtered and sanitized. The danger is that the line between genuine protection and unnecessary censorship is thin. By blocking information under the label of safety, the rule risks raising a generation accustomed to limits on what they can see or say, normalizing censorship from the very start of digital life. Number 3. Increased surveillance of private messages. Perhaps the most unsettling of the new measures is the push for platforms to scan private messages in the name of safety. This rule requires companies to monitor encrypted chats for harmful or illegal content. While the goal may be to target criminal activity, the ripple effect is far larger. Encrypted services like WhatsApp, Signal, and iMessage exist to protect privacy. Forcing them to scan messages undermines that promise, essentially transforming private conversations into material that can be flagged, reviewed, or removed. This blurs the line between security and surveillance, raising fears that no conversation is truly private anymore. For ordinary citizens, this rule reshapes how they use digital communication. Imagine planning a protest, discussing sensitive medical concerns, or simply joking with friends. If an algorithm misinterprets your words, your chat could be flagged. Even if nothing comes of it, the awareness that your private exchanges may be monitored changes behavior. People begin to self-censor, avoiding certain phrases, topics, or jokes because they fear scrutiny. The quiet shift is psychological but powerful, a sense that someone may always be watching. Once that mindset takes root, openness shrinks, and the freedom to speak candidly fades. Defenders of the rule argue that it helps detect predators and criminal networks, and on paper that sounds essential. Yet opponents warn of the slippery slope. Once a system for scanning encrypted messages exists, it can be expanded. Today it may target child safety, but tomorrow it could target political dissent or unpopular opinions. Privacy advocates call this a backdoor into encryption that weakens security for everyone, including journalists, whistleblowers, and citizens who rely on confidentiality. By requiring surveillance at such a personal level, the rule risks dismantling one of the last safe spaces for free expression in the digital world. Number 4. Heavy fines for platforms. Another cornerstone of the UK's new framework is the imposition of hefty financial penalties on platforms that fail to comply. These fines can reach billions, making them some of the most severe corporate punishments ever designed in the digital space. At first, the rule appears to target tech giants, ensuring accountability and responsibility. But the unintended consequence is that companies, fearing the massive financial impact, are likely to err on the side of caution. That means over-censorship becomes the default strategy, where questionable content is removed immediately rather than risk an investigation or penalty. For users, this creates an invisible but heavy barrier. Imagine posting a nuanced opinion on a controversial topic. Even if it is legal and not harmful, platforms may still delete it instantly because reviewing the context takes time and a fine is too expensive to risk. The scale of punishment pushes platforms to prioritize compliance over fairness. Smaller platforms, which cannot absorb billion-pound fines, may go even further, blocking broad categories of content entirely. This results in a narrower digital environment where only the safest, blandest opinions survive. Everyday citizens lose out as diversity of thought becomes collateral damage. Supporters argue that fines will finally hold platforms accountable for failing to remove harmful content quickly. Yet critics emphasize that this rule flips responsibility in a dangerous way. Instead of protecting free expression, companies become gatekeepers, motivated not by fairness, but by fear of punishment. The loudest voices, corporate and governmental, gain more influence, while quieter citizens risk being silenced. By tying financial survival to censorship speed, the rule indirectly shapes the tone of online conversation, creating a space that feels polished and safe on the surface, but hollow of the raw, authentic dialogue that drives democratic societies. Number 5. Expansion of hate speech definitions. Hate speech laws have long been controversial, balancing the need to protect vulnerable groups with the importance of free expression. The UK's new framework expands these definitions, making them broader and less clearly defined. On paper, this sounds like progress, offering stronger shields against harmful language. Yet in practice, the elastic nature of the term means that speech which is offensive but legal could now fall into the category of hate. Political criticism, religious debate, or satire could be swept up under this wider net. The line between disagreeing and discriminating begins to blur, and that has significant consequences for public conversation. For citizens, the expansion creates uncertainty. If you want to challenge government policy, question cultural traditions, or engage in heated debate, your words could be flagged. not because they directly incite violence or hatred, but because they might offend or unsettle someone. This opens the door for complaints to carry disproportionate weight, where platforms or authorities step in, not to protect safety, but to manage discomfort. The result is a climate of hesitation, where people think twice before speaking honestly, even on issues where disagreement is essential. Public debate, already fragile in digital spaces, becomes narrower and less diverse. Supporters highlight that wider definitions help protect marginalized communities, reducing harmful rhetoric. Yet critics counter that vague standards can be weaponized, silencing dissent rather than protecting against real harm. What begins as an effort to build inclusivity may end up limiting the very diversity of perspectives it claims to defend. Free speech depends on the ability to tolerate, even fiercely challenge, ideas we dislike. By expanding hate speech laws without clear limits, the rule risks stifling not just harmful voices, but the healthy conflicts that drive progress in a democratic society. Number 6. Mandatory identity verification. Among the most alarming proposals is the push for real identity verification on digital platforms. Supporters claim this will reduce trolling, harassment, and criminal misuse of anonymous accounts. Yet anonymity online is not simply a shield for bad actors, it is also a lifeline for whistleblowers, activists, and ordinary citizens who fear retaliation for their views. By forcing people to link their profiles to passports, driver's licenses, or other official documents, the rule reshapes the very nature of online interaction. Instead of a space where ideas compete, it becomes a system where identity is policed, and every word can be tied back to your legal name. For millions of users, this is a chilling prospect. Think of employees exposing corporate wrongdoing, citizens criticizing government policy, or survivors of abuse seeking safe communities. Without anonymity, these voices may never speak up. Even everyday discussions take on a new weight, because your opinions are permanently attached to your identity. That connection increases the fear of consequences, whether from employers, authorities, or social backlash. The digital world shifts from a place of exploration and debate to one of constant self-monitoring. People censor themselves, not because their words are unlawful, but because they no longer feel safe taking risks. Advocates argue that accountability is necessary to prevent harmful behavior. Yet critics point out that those determined to spread hate or commit crimes often find ways around verification systems. The ones truly silenced are ordinary users who simply value their privacy. By equating anonymity with danger, the rule ignores the countless positive roles it plays in society. The demand for real identities risks dismantling spaces where vulnerable individuals can find support, undermining the internet's role as a sanctuary for open dialogue and marginalized voices. Number 7. Police powers over protest speech. Another major shift comes from rules granting police expanded authority over protest-related speech. These changes give law enforcement greater power to intervene when gatherings are deemed disruptive, noisy, or potentially harmful to public order. On the surface, this might sound like a way to keep communities safe. Yet, critics argue it sets a troubling precedent, where the threshold for silencing a protest is no longer tied to violence or illegality, but to subjective judgments about inconvenience. The ability to curtail speech at demonstrations means that the right to assemble and speak out, a cornerstone of democracy, becomes conditional, fragile, and easily restricted. For ordinary citizens, the implications are stark. Imagine joining a peaceful march to call for climate action, workers' rights, or healthcare reform. Even if the event is lawful, police could shut it down if it is deemed too loud or disruptive. Protest organizers risk fines, arrests, or bans, creating a chilling effect that discourages participation. Over time, fewer people show up, not because they don't care, but because the risks outweigh their voices. The result is a muted civil society where pressing issues struggle to break through without the visibility that protest provides. Defenders of the rule emphasize safety, arguing that protests should not disrupt daily life for others. Yet opponents see this as a slippery slope, one that transforms legitimate expressions of dissent into acts of disorder. By giving police broad discretion, The rules risk creating a system where unpopular causes are disproportionately targeted. The principle of protest is not comfort, but disruption. It is meant to challenge power and demand change. By curbing this freedom, the new powers edge closer to silencing democracy itself, leaving citizens with fewer avenues to express frustration, passion, and demand accountability. Number 8. Algorithmic control of visibility. A subtle yet powerful rule requires platforms to adjust their algorithms to downrank or hide flagged content. Unlike outright bans, this form of control is invisible to users. Your post may not be deleted, but it can be buried so deep that almost no one sees it. On the surface, this appears to balance free speech with safety. People can technically still speak, but harmful material will not spread widely. Yet the effect is far more insidious, a system where speech exists but audiences vanish. This quiet suppression makes it nearly impossible for citizens to know when they are being silenced. For everyday users, this means their digital presence becomes unpredictable. A thoughtful post challenging a political narrative could suddenly see zero again, not because people disagree, but because the algorithm quietly removed it from feeds. Creators, activists, and ordinary citizens may notice their voices shrinking without explanation. Over time, many simply give up, believing their opinions no longer matter. The difference between speaking and being heard becomes stark, and people adapt by avoiding controversial topics, effectively censoring themselves before the system even has to act. Supporters argue that this method helps stop harmful content from going viral, preventing misinformation or abuse from spreading unchecked. Yet critics highlight the danger of such hidden moderation. Unlike bans or removals, downranking lacks transparency. Users rarely know when they are affected, making appeals or corrections nearly impossible. By placing algorithms at the center of free expression, the rule shifts power from citizens to unaccountable systems, driven by government pressure and corporate caution. Speech becomes less about legality and more about algorithmic approval, creating a digital environment where visibility itself is a privilege controlled by unseen forces. Number 9. Criminalization of disinformation. Another controversial aspect of the UK's new framework is the potential criminalization of disinformation. At first, this seems straightforward. False information spreads quickly and can cause real harm, but the challenge lies in defining what counts as disinformation. A mistake, an unpopular opinion, or even satire could be swept into this category. By turning vague definitions into criminal offences, the rule gives enormous power to authorities and platforms to decide which narratives are valid and which are punishable. This blurs the line between protecting truth and controlling it, raising questions about who gets to decide the official version of reality. For ordinary citizens, this creates uncertainty in everyday speech. Imagine sharing a story about a health remedy, questioning an election result, or posting a meme that pokes fun at leaders. If the content is labeled disinformation, you could face not just removal, but potential legal consequences. Even without arrests, the looming threat of punishment changes behavior. People begin to second-guess their words, choosing silence over the risk of being accused. The result is less open discussion and fewer challenges to dominant narratives, creating an echo chamber where only officially approved voices thrive. Supporters argue that curbing disinformation is essential to protect public health, democracy, and safety. Yet critics point out that history is filled with examples where what was once called false later proved true. Scientific breakthroughs, political scandals, and social movements often began as minority views labeled misinformation. By criminalizing such content, the rule risks punishing innovation, satire, and dissent. Instead of fostering resilience through debate and evidence, it leans toward control through fear. In a democracy, truth should emerge from open dialogue, not enforcement. This rule threatens to flip that principle, turning disagreement into danger and mistakes into crimes. Number 10. Data collection and digital footprint tracking. The final rule reshaping digital life in the UK involves increased data collection and tracking of online activity. Under these measures, platforms are encouraged, or in some cases required, to gather extensive information about user behavior. This includes not just what you post, but how often you engage, what content you view, and even the tone of your interactions. While presented as a tool for safety and accountability, the deeper effect is the creation of a permanent digital footprint, where every action leaves a trace that can be reviewed, flagged, or judged. Privacy becomes less of a right and more of a managed privilege. For citizens, this creates an atmosphere of constant observation. Imagine knowing that every like, share, or comment builds a profile of who you are and what you believe. Even if the information is never used against you directly, the awareness shapes behavior. People may avoid sensitive topics, controversial communities, or politically charged discussions because they fear their digital footprint could follow them in unexpected ways, whether through employers, authorities, or future regulations. The sense of being watched turns the internet from a space of exploration into a place of self-surveillance, where people censor themselves long before rules or moderators intervene. Supporters argue that this tracking allows harmful patterns to be detected early, protecting citizens from exploitation or abuse. Critics, however, warn that the system creates powerful tools of control. Once such infrastructure exists, it can easily be expanded beyond its original purpose. What begins as safety monitoring could evolve into political profiling, limiting opportunities or silencing dissent. By normalizing mass data collection, the rule erodes the fragile line between personal freedom and state or corporate oversight, leaving citizens exposed in ways they may not even realize until it is too late. The 10 rules we've explored reveal a future where speaking freely may no longer be as simple as posting a thought or joining a protest. While each measure is framed as protection, guarding children, preventing harm, or ensuring safety, the combined effect paints a very different picture. Privacy shrinks as surveillance expands, debate narrows under broader definitions, and visibility becomes a privilege controlled by algorithms and fines. Citizens may not feel the weight immediately, but over time the chilling effect grows, shaping what people say and even what they dare to think. The heart of democracy lies in open dialogue, where disagreement, debate, and dissent push society forward. When rules blur the line between safety and control, the result is not security but silence. These policies may not silence everyone at once, but they risk creating a culture where citizens silence themselves, and that is far more powerful than censorship by force. It's censorship by fear. So now the question is yours. Do these rules truly protect, or do they quietly erode the freedoms they claim to defend? Share your thoughts below, because the conversation doesn't end here. It begins with we choose to keep speaking.